blood on the crystal floor looked like spilled wine, except it didn't soak into the facets. It sat there, thick and impossibly red against the translucent spires of Skyreach. Silas Vane stood in the center of the prism arena, a titan forged in high gravity, his chest heaving with a rhythm that sounded like a grinding engine. Around him, the Etherians hovered on iridescent wings, their hollow bones trembling at the sheer, kinetic weight of a man who refused to break. Hollow bones were about to meet an iron will, and for the first time in an age, the Skyreach capital knew the scent of fear. It had started as a spectacle. The sovereignty had brought the human captain across the stars, not as a diplomat, but as a curiosity, a creature from a world that tried to crush its children with every step. To the Etherians, Silas was a biological anomaly. He was dense, his muscles corded like industrial cables, and his bones were reinforced with calcium deposits that would have made him sink like a stone in their sky cities. They called him a beast, watching from behind gold-threaded veils as he moved with a slow, deliberate gravity that seemed to pull at the very air around him. High Lady Lyra had been the only one to look past the scars and the heavy brow. She was the architect of the high spires, a woman of sharp intellect and wings that shimmered like oil on water. When Silas first stepped off the transport, the pressure of his footsteps had cracked the decorative tiles of the landing pad. Most of the court laughed, a tinkling sound like falling glass, but Lyra had felt a shiver of genuine awe. "He isn't broken by the world," she had murmured to her father. "He is the world's response to itself." The incident that changed everything happened in the Sun Garden. Archon Kalen, a noble whose arrogance was as thin and brittle as his skeleton, decided to humiliate the human for the court's amusement. He had cornered a young kitchen servant, a girl whose wings were still soft and downy, mocking her for a minor stumble. When Kalen raised a jagged decorative blade to clip the girl's flight feathers as a lesson, Silas moved. He didn't fly. He didn't have the grace of the wind. He simply existed in the space between the blade and the girl. The sound of Kalen's strike hitting Silas's forearm wasn't the sound of a cut. It was the sound of a bird hitting a mountain. The blade shattered. Truth is, the Etherians didn't understand resilience. They understood avoidance and flight. But as Silas stood there, his skin barely marked by the metal that had disintegrated against him, the garden fell into a terrifying silence. He didn't roar. He didn't strike back. He just looked at Kalen with eyes that had seen the birth of stars and the death of empires. "Enough," Silas said. The word was low, vibrating in the chests of everyone present. That was the spark. Kalen's humiliation turned to a cold, murderous ambition. He couldn't kill the beast with a blade, so he would kill the system that allowed the beast to stand. The coup began at midnight, a flurry of darkened wings and silent betrayals that left the Skyreach throne slick with the blood of the old guard. Silas was in his quarters, a room that felt like a shoebox for a man of his stature. When Lyra arrived, her wings were torn, a streak of silver blood matting her primary feathers. She didn't go to her kin. She went to the monster. "They're coming for the sanctum," she whispered, her fingers clutching his rough tunics. "Kalen has the guard. He's going to purge the weakness from our blood." Silas looked at her, his large, calloused hand reaching up to steady her. The heat of his skin was like a furnace in the cool mountain air. For a moment, the space between them was electric, a collision of two worlds that should never have touched. He felt the rapid hummingbird beat of her heart under his palm, and for the first time, he knew he wasn't just a guest. He was a protector. "Let them come," Silas said, his voice a promise of iron. The prism arena was a bowl of jagged light, every surface polished to a mirror finish. Kalen stood opposite Silas, his wings spread wide to catch the updrafts, a pair of serrated glass blades humming in his hands. He looked like a god of the air, weightless and lethal. Silas stood like a boulder in a stream, his feet planted heavy on the crystal. He had invoked the right of iron, an ancient dusty law that allowed a challenger to stand as a shield for the crown. The rule was simple. The challenger could not strike back until they had endured the full measure of the Archon's judgment. Kalen's first strike was a blur of silver. It caught Silas across the shoulder, the glass blade whistling as it bit into meat. Silas didn't flinch. He didn't even shift his weight. He simply took the hit, his boots groaning against the floor. Blood on the crystal floor looked like rubies under the artificial suns. "You are a nightmare, forged in high gravity," Kalen hissed, sweeping past for a second pass. "A mistake of evolution." The third strike opened a gash on Silas's ribs. The 10th took a piece of his ear. By the 20th, the human was a map of crimson and bruised purple. The Ithurian court watched in a terrifying, breathless hush. They had never seen someone simply stay. To them, survival was flight. To Silas, survival was the refusal to move. Each impact vibrated through his dense skeleton, a dull throb that he locked away in the back of his mind. He watched Kalen's movements, timing the flutter of his wings, the way his hollow bones shifted under his skin before a lunge. 25, 26. Kalen was breathing hard now, his movements growing frantic. He couldn't understand why the beast was still standing. The human's eyes remained fixed on him, dark and unwavering. It was hollow bones versus iron will, and the iron wasn't bending. 27, Silas rasped. The number was a death knell. Kalen lunged for the throat. His wings snapped shut for maximum velocity. It was the strike of a predator. But Silas was no longer a target. He was a trap. The human moved with a sudden, explosive force that the Ithurians couldn't track. He didn't use a blade. He didn't need one. He stepped into Kalen's guard, his hand closing around the Archon's forearm like a hydraulic press. The sound of Kalen's radius shattering was like a dry branch snapping in winter. The Archon screamed, a high, thin sound that echoed off the spires. Silas didn't let go. He brought his other fist down in a single, crushing arc. The impact didn't just break Kalen, it grounded him. The Ithurian collapsed, his iridescent wings crumpled and useless, his pry broken alongside his frame. Silas stood over him, his breath coming in ragged, bloody plumes. He didn't deliver a final blow. He didn't have to. The silence in the arena was absolute. The monster had become a prince by the simple virtue of outlasting the storm. In the quiet that followed, Lyra descended. She didn't land with the practiced grace of a noble. She stumbled as her feet hit the crystal, her eyes locked on the man who was bleeding for her world. She reached out, her delicate fingers trembling as they touched the heat of his forearm. The contrast was startling. The pale, fragile curve of her hand against the dark, battered iron of his skin. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice breaking the spell of the arena. "I'm a human, Lyra," Silas replied, his voice a low rumble of exhaustion and triumph. "We don't know how to leave." The transition of power was not a surge of violence, but a realization. The sovereignty saw in Silas what they lacked, a foundation. He remained on Skyreach, not as a captive or a curiosity, but as a pillar. When he married Lyra under the 3 setting suns, he didn't try to fly. He walked to her, his heavy footsteps a new rhythm for an old world, leading the sovereignty into an era where strength was measured not by how high one could soar, but by how much one could endure for the sake of another.